Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, Danielle, the parallel time counterpart of Penny Dreadful. And I'm really thrilled about this episode because I got to speak to Craig Hurd-McKenney, the writer of the new Curse of Dark Shadows graphic novel coming from Hermes Press. I got to talk to Craig over at the Dark Shadows Remembrance Weekend in Burbank back in July, and he gave me all the details on this really exciting new graphic novel that's coming out, perhaps the first in a series of graphic novels. You don't want to miss this one. And if you jump on over to YouTube, if you're listening to the audio version of this, Craig was kind enough to send me a couple of images from the comic, including the cover and one of the interior pages. If you want to see what this graphic novel is going to look like, you might want to jump on over to YouTube and check that out. Now, before we get to the show, I have a few great things to tell you about. First of all, there is a new TeePublic shop, Penny Dreadful the 13th TeePublic shop. So many people have asked me for Terror at Collinwood t-shirts, and I spoke to a couple of friends out at Remembrance Weekend, and they encouraged me to launch a TeePublic shop. So there are several designs by Eric Marshall, the wonderful and amazingly talented Eric Marshall, my good friend who designed the Terror at Collinwood logo. He did the Dark Shadows Hanna-Barbera cartoon drawings. Eric is brilliant, and he was kind enough to kind of reconfigure the Terror at Collinwood logos so you can get several options on TeePublic of the Terror at Collinwood logo designed by Eric, but I also put up quite a few pieces of artwork by various artists from my hosted horror show, Shilling Shockers. So you can get designs by Robbie Brown, Liz LaFrance, Sarah Adam, Donald David. I mean, all kinds of great stuff with more to come. So check it out. The website is teepublic.com/user/Penny Dreadful Roman numeral 13. XIII. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the TeePublic. So if you want to get a Terror at Collinwood shirt, now's your chance. And you can also get Eric's artwork on mugs, tote bags, pillows, all kinds of cool stuff. So now's your chance. Snag a Terror at Collinwood t-shirt if you want one. Represent. TeePublic does all the work on this. They provide the shirts, they do the printing. If there are exchanges, they handle all of that. And I only actually get about $2 to $4 per shirt. They have a sale. It's like maybe $2, and then at regular price, I get like $4 per shirt. So it all goes back into the podcast. All proceeds go back into the costs of producing the podcast, the editing software that I use, the hosting for the website where all the episodes are archived and where the RSS feeds can access the episodes. If you don't want to get a shirt, groovy, you can still help the podcast by donating at buymeacoffee.com. That's another option for contributing to the podcast. So thank you to all of those who have done so. Okay, so I have some exciting news. I mentioned this in the last episode. The Sleepy Hollow International Film Festival is coming up, and there is going to be a Dark Shadows component. Join 3 ladies of Dark Shadows in celebrating the Jonathan Frid centenary on the East Coast. Sharon Smith-Lentz will be there, Marie Wallace will be there, and Donna Wandry will be there. It's happening at the Tarrytown Music Hall on October 12th, 2024 in Tarrytown, New York, and it's taking place at 1:30 p.m. If you've never been to Sleepy Hollow in October, you're in for a treat, a trick or treat, because it's Halloween Central. Okay, maybe outside of Salem, Massachusetts, you got Salem, you got Sleepy Hollow. If you're in the States, you want to be in one of those two places because you have not experienced Halloween to its full potential if you have not been in one of those places during the Halloween season. And with a Dark Shadows element now, I mean, come on, you gotta go, especially if you missed the Burbank event. If you wanted to have an event on the East Coast, here it is. You definitely want to check it out. So that's coming up. More exciting news for you. Amanda Desiree, who you heard on Terror at Collinwood episodes 75 and 57, has announced that she is putting together a new book. After each Dark Shadows festival and Dark Shadows event, Amanda would commit her memories of the weekend's excitement to the internet, sharing her festival reports on various message boards, mailing lists, and other fan groups that were active at the time. So over the years, Amanda has posted these in-depth, really incredible write-ups of the Dark Shadows festivals especially, but all of these Dark Shadows events that she attended, and she is planning a forthcoming book which she has announced on her blog. It's called The Dark Shadows Event Diary, Memories of Festivals, Film Screenings, and Fan Gatherings. I'll put a link in the show notes to Amanda's wonderful blog, and you can read her article about this upcoming book that she is going to be releasing. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be definitely a must-have for all Dark Shadows fans. Speaking of Dark Shadows events, yet another Dark Shadows element as part of an event, Monster Bash, a classic horror, sci-fi, fantasy convention with the emphasis on the classic horror aspect, I would say. I attended that convention many times over the years as a guest, as Penny Dreadful. It's been quite a number of years since I've I've been there. They're finally adding a Dark Shadows component to next summer's event. It's going to be happening June 20th through the 22nd, 2025. It's a 3-day event, and Catherine Lee Scott and Sharon Smith Lentz are both going to be there. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the Monster Bash page. And the event will be happening at the Pittsburgh Marriott North, 100 Cranberry Woods Drive, Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. I also heard from Eric, who I just mentioned, who illustrated the Tarot Collinwood logos. Eric let me know that Dark Shadows The Beginning is now streaming free with no ads on Amazon Prime. Of course, Dark Shadows The Beginning is simply Dark Shadows pre-Barnabas, the first 10 months of the show, kind of branded as its own thing. Distinct from Dark Shadows. It's kind of weird, but it is just Dark Shadows. It's just the first 10 months. Pre-Barnabas, free with no ads. And of course, you can also watch Dark Shadows with ads on Amazon Prime streaming as well. And Tubi. All of Dark Shadows is on Tubi, free with ads. Plenty of options for Dark Shadows. I think it's still on Pluto too. They still have a Dark Shadows channel there. And of course, the Coffin box set from MPI. I mean, it's amazing how accessible Dark Shadows is now. If you want to experience Dark Shadows, it's right there at your fingertips. Never in my wildest dreams, when I was 9, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I never would have imagined this. I mean, it's amazing, right? You can watch Dark Shadows any episode, anytime. Well, maybe not the lost episode. You can hear the lost episode, though. Continuing on, I got an email from Catherine Crestman, the author, who she's been on the podcast a couple of times. She let me know she has a couple of new books out. One of them is called Haunted House and Other Strange Tales, and the other one is called Shunned Houses. I'll put links in the show notes. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them on barnesandnoble.com, etc. And with that said, let's get to the show. Craig Hurd-McKenney is going to tell us all about the new Curse of Dark Shadows graphic novel. There are spoilers here for those who listen. I am here at the Dark Shadows Remembrance event with comics creator Craig Hurd-McKenney, who is a Xeric Grant Awarded and Ignatz Award nominated writer. His website can be found at hpscomics.com. And we're going to talk to Craig today because he has some exciting things to tell us. We're going to hear all about his career in comics and what he's working on with regards to Dark Shadows. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be here with you. I am a fan of the podcast, and I think you have done an amazing job bringing in new perspectives and new ways to think about the show that we all know and love. And I just so much appreciate what you have given to the community. And so I am a fan of you, and I'm very excited to be here talking with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Craig. That's so sweet. I really appreciate that. I'm just having fun. I love Dark Shadows, and I love talking about Dark Shadows. So what better way to do that than to have a podcast that our fans come on and talk about Dark Shadows? But you're not only a fan, you're also a creator. You are working on tell us what it is that's coming for Dark Shadows fans soon.
So we have an official original graphic novel called Curse of Dark Shadows that will be out next summer. It's coming from Hermes Press, and it is about 175 pages of story that brings us up to speed on where people have been and what they've been up to.
This is awesome because, Hermes Press, of course, has been printing all of the original Dark Shadows novels, all of the Gold Key Dark Shadows comics. They've reprinted all of that stuff, but now this is an original, brand new trade paperback, a graphic novel about Dark Shadows, new Dark Shadows content, official Dark Shadows content, Super cool. This is an officially licensed Dark Shadows comic book. I mean, we've been wanting this for a while. We haven't had anything since Dynamite. It's Dynamite Comics. That's 12 years ago now? It's been a while. So how exciting. So I want to hear all about the comic. But before we do, I would like to ask you about your own background and how you discovered Dark Shadows. Like, you're a fan yourself. You're wearing a Fashions Courtesy of Arbeck's t-shirt, which is wonderful. Stuart Manning makes those. I'll put a link in the show notes to that. So tell me about Dark Shadows and your origins with the show.
Well, my mother was one of the original run home from school and turn on the television to watch Dark Shadows kids. So Dark Shadows is something that has always been on my radar. Now, obviously, when I was a kid, it was not being rerun. It was not like on Sci-Fi Channel yet. So really the only knowledge that I had of it was from what she shared of the show. Now, I was maybe 10 or 11, and I remember this very vividly. I was spending the weekend at my grandparents' house, and the Saturday afternoon movie was House of Dark Shadows, which in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this is the show that my mom watched as a kid. And obviously, it's very different than the television show, and it's much bloodier and and a lot more violent. And I have this like vivid, traumatizing memory of House of Dark Shadows in my mind. And obviously, I rediscovered the show because we did get it in syndication. Jim will correct me on that, but we had a local station that was rerunning it in Dallas because I grew up in Dallas. And then years later, we got it on Sci-Fi again. So I slowly but surely built up my knowledge of the show and the different ways of catching up on it. And then recently revisited the entire series during the pandemic. I thought if the world is going to end, who better to end it with than with the Collins family? And so it just happened to all coincide, like that rewatch, with this book coming to fruition.
I love it. Now, you're also you're a former English professor, and you are well versed in Gothic literature, Victorian literature, and you are also a fan of comics and a creator of comics. So you brought some comics for me, which I appreciate. Thank you. They're really cool. Boris Karloff's Tales of Mystery, revived at Gold Key, a Bronte Sisters comic, so many cool comics, all spooky style stuff. So tell me about your interest in all things spooky.
Well, a lot of the guests that you've had on the podcast have really kind of talked about this. It's that sense of being other, the idea that horror opens up this avenue, all of the different sort of flavors of horror, whether that's Gothic or, Splatterfest or Giallo. It is this sense of being other. And I think that's the appeal of horror to me. And I often say sometimes that horror is not necessarily about a monster, but it's about our own minds. We are the monsters. How we behave in any given situation is the thing that determines how monstrous we are. And so I would say a lot of my stuff is really influenced by the things you just said, like my background with Victorian literature and Gothic literature. I grew up in the South, so Southern Gothic is also something that is a huge influence on me, and I hope to bring. I don't hope. I think I pretty successfully did it, but I want to bring a little bit of Southern Gothic to Dark Shadows as well, because I feel like that fits. It's about these really complex family relationships and the scary, dilapidated house and what goes on there. So that's kind of like my superhero origin story.
I love it. I'm thinking a Rose for Emily, maybe. Or
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Faulkner, McCullers, Shirley Jackson, like
Oh,
all of the rich history that we have. And I think also it's really important in that list to recognize that many of those names are women authors,
yes.
because similarly with Gothic literature, uh, it's even the show itself was really great, about like Leela Swift directing
Yeah.
however many episodes. Like I don't have that
lot,
number,
a
but a
lot.
lot.
Most
But
of them. And Violet Wells was one of the great writers on
yes,
the show. Yeah.
yes, and that was unheard of for the time. So, the property lends itself really well to like this strong female voice and presence, and that's something else that I want to bring to the book.
Absolutely. The women in the show are strong characters for sure. Yeah, absolutely. What about comics? How did you get into comics? Were you a fan as a kid?
I was a huge fan, and I think Super Friends was the gateway drug.
Awesome.
And then, back in the day, 7-Eleven would have the little mini comics that came with Slurpees, like the burger joints. McDonald's and Burger King had the superhero glasses. And then, really, the first comic that I followed with regularity was the Uncanny X-Men. And again, that same sort of sense of otherness. It's this group of people who are special and they're being asked to hide who they are because they're feared and hated for the thing that makes them special. Uh, what does that sound like? That sounds like Barnabas's story, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So there's a deep resonance with those characters for me, and that kind of led me into a lifelong love of comics. And since then, like I've gotten into a lot more like non-superhero independent type of books, horror books. We talked before we started recording a little bit about like Hellboy and Mike Mignola's work.
Yeah.
And so there's a great book now. Emil Ferris just released the second volume of her graphic novel. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the title. I believe it's My Favorite Monster. But we'll double check that and we can correct that at the end. But
I looked it up, and I think it's My Favorite Thing is Monsters.
but that's amazing as well. So if people have not read that, you should read it. It will give you a little bit of a sense of the types of things that I am drawn to and gravitate towards.
Nice. What about your background as a comics creator? So you were a fan of comics growing up. So how did you get into to actually creating content?
So I lived in Texas until I taught my very first job. I was teaching high school English and speech and debate. That was fresh out of school. I was like, I need to work. I want to work. I want to get a sense of this. And then I had the opportunity to move. I was the MTV local consultant for Dallas.
Oh, cool.
And I had the opportunity to take the Seattle spot. And I also was starting an internship at Fantagraphics Books, which is based in Seattle. They do Love and Rockets. They've done a lot of the Chris Ware books. And in fact, they publish Emil's book as well. And so I found my way to Seattle, and I was like, I'm going to be at Fantagraphics. I'm going to learn the business side of things. I want to see how it's done because I can make whatever I want. But if I don't have a sense of how to get the material into the market, to put it together and be professional and how to sell it at shows, then it's never going to manifest. And so that's what I did. I spent those first 2 years being in Seattle, really studying the business. I was making zines and mini comics at the time, and I even the first few books that I did were anthology titles. So I didn't put anything of mine in the first one. It was just like, really, I want to practice with other people's work. It's going to be my best effort in it, I feel like I did an okay job. And then I felt confident enough to really shift into doing my own books.
Yeah. What was your first published comic?
So my first comic was called The Magic If. Gervasio and Carlos, who will be helping us on Curse of Dark Shadows, or the artists on that book. It's about a stage magician who is having a bit of obsessive compulsive reaction to a stunt magician, like a David Blaine style magician. And it's this whole obsessive battle that's only happening in his mind with this person that doesn't even know who he is. And it's a semi-autobiographical in the sense of like, I do tend to like become obsessive about work and a little bit of maybe truth telling about myself. And it's about the impact that has on his life, this obsessive battle with a fellow magician who is not doing the type of magic that he feels is true stage magic.
Yeah. Oh, that's super cool. You mentioned comic books, and everybody thinks superheroes, Superman, Spider-Man, which I love too. Yeah, right. Yeah, but it's like there's so much more to it, and that includes Dark Shadows. Of course, Dark Shadows had a substantial run with Gold Key Comics in the '60s and '70s. I just recently posted an episode about that.
Thank you for that episode. I think that your guest did such a great job of really talking about the business issues that impacted the types of stories that could be told as well, right? Like Marvel and DC couldn't have touched Dark Shadows as a property due to the Comics Code Authority. But then it was so lovely to hear you all talk about the issues that really resonated with you and your favorites. So thank you for that
Oh,
episode.
thank you. And I'm grateful to have had Jeff Thompson and Nick Caputo on that episode because, Nick is a huge comics expert and Jeff is a massive expert on the Gold Key comics and the Ross novels, and so it was great talking to them. So Gold Key had Dark Shadows going for 35 issues, and then there were no more Dark Shadows comics for quite a while, and then we had the Innovation comics for the 1991 series, which were beautifully painted comic books, and then Dynamite also had the Dark Shadows back in 2012, and that ran for a bit, and then nothing. But now we have this brand new graphic novel. So I want to hear all about this. So first of all, who's working on it? Because you're writing it, and who else? You mentioned a couple of the other creators. So talk to us about them.
So Jock is doing the artwork. Jock is an Argentinian artist who just finished up a book for Image Comics called In Hell We Fight. It's a great book. I'm trying to think of how I want to say this without spoiling it. It is a story of 4 dead children who are trapped in hell and their exploration of trying to like get out of that situation.
Wow. Yeah. Huh.
It's much less dark than it sounds. But I feel like it's something that your audience would really resonate with.
Yeah.
With the idea that, we've seen Diabolos and we've been to these dark realms, and so Jock just has such a vigor, and the way he can capture a character's emotion in one panel, it's just mind-blowing. There's one panel in particular that I'm thinking about right now, and it's Carolyn and David, and it's just a simple moment where they're sitting there in a beat of silence in a conversation, and I'm telling you, like, I nearly started crying because it is what I envisioned in my mind. It's what I want people to feel when they read it. And he's just doing such a bang up job. I can't wait for people to see it.
Right.
We've got Gervasio coming in to do some assistance with backgrounds. So Gervasio is like this incredibly intricate architectural minded illustrator drawer. I almost said drawer. You can tell I've been flying today. And I feel like people are really going to appreciate the level of work and detail that's gone into making Collinwood look like Collinwood and Collinsport actually feeling like a real place. I have a pizza shop in Collinsport now, Craig's Pizzeria.
Nice.
But we'll see things like Braithwaite's. We'll see some of the locations that we all know and love as well. Right. Little Easter eggs peppered in the background. It's not going to be a huge plot point, but we really wanted it to feel, because the show didn't necessarily get out into the town very much. Early on it did, but as the show went on, they're in parallel time. They're not spending time down at the sheriff's station anymore.
Sure, yeah.
So we wanted to bring that feel back as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, that was something I really loved about those early episodes, is you get to see a little more of Collinsport, which of course they shot those exteriors in Essex, Connecticut. You can still see a lot of those locations in Collinsport Inn and the sheriff's office and Evans Cottage. And but yeah, that's wonderful. Jock's artwork, you showed me a couple of teases, sneak peeks, which I appreciate, and yeah, definitely a very Mike Mignola Hellboy kind of a vibe I got from them. Different look than what we've seen before in terms of Dark Shadows comics, but it works for what you're going for here.
I hope that people will be open to it, because it is a little different, but one of the things that we wanted, we just wanted to honor the special feel of the show, the special community that has come to go around the show. We wanted it to feel a little different, but also to really look like you're in Collinsport, like you're in Collinwood. You recognize which room you're in, and we are going to great pains to make sure that it feels that way. We did get permission to not do actor likenesses. So I feel like that's important for people to know.
So there are no actor likenesses, a reinterpretation of what the character looks like, kind of thing.
I sent a lot of photo reference to Jock, and we went, we worked with Jim to create character looks that we all agreed were appropriate. It helps Jock go much faster to not have to do character likenesses. And then there's also this weird issue too of like, for the actors who aren't around anymore, like, do we have their permission? Like, what's the legality of negotiating that? And it just felt like a whole weird, uncomfortable thing. And so they will look and feel like you know them to look and feel, but it will not be a like for like.
Right. Well, it was like that in Gold Key anyway. Most of the characters did not really. You could.
This little like flip on
Yeah.
the hair.
Yeah, and
His
Ingle.
Farrah Fawcett bangs.
Yes, yeah, and Quentin. I think my friend Steve referred to him as looking like Engelbert Humperdinck in the Gold Key comics.
But we say that, and they truly are. That artwork on the original run
cool.
is beautiful.
Yeah.
But it is its own thing.
It's its own thing. Julia definitely looked unique.
She looked not like herself at all.
So I mean, it's just a different. We'll know who the characters are. It'll be
Yes.
obvious. Okay, so let's get in the background. You said we're going to see some of the backgrounds from the show. Collinwood, we'll see. So there are efforts being made to make, like, say, the drawing room and the foyer, etc., look like what we remember.
Yes, and I sent many film clips to Jock. I sent many photos, and he was like, I'm still having a little bit of trouble visualizing it. And for those of you that have seen Daytime Gothic issue 1, Stewart has that article where they basically provide the framework of the set, the foyer and the drawing room and the stairs up. And I literally took a photo of that and I sent it to Jock, and I was like, does this help? And he was like, oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what I needed. So it's this weird like confluence of events where had that article not been there, like I would have had to have found another way to describe the specifics of what we needed for those rooms.
I mean, I know you can't spoil anything.
Sure.
So I want to ask you a little bit about what we can expect in this graphic novel. Before, though, we do that, I would like to ask you, how did this come about? Like, what was the process of this Dark Shadows graphic novel coming into existence?
So I spent the pandemic in a comics Discord group, all comics creators. Some were artists, some were writers, some were both. And as we do when we're in a professional group, people were riffing on the things that they would really love to do. There were some folks who wanted to do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and there were folks who wanted to do Power Rangers. And I was like, oh, you guys, why are you spending all your time like focused on these other properties? You really should be making your own things. And like, I can't think of a single, and then I didn't even get the words out of my mouth, and Dark Shadows popped into my mind. And I was like, I could totally do Dark Shadows. If I can figure out how to make this work, I can totally do Dark Shadows. And even in the moment of saying that, like, I knew exactly what it would be. Like my sort of metric for when a story is ready is when I can see the movie in my mind. That's how I describe it. And I can see it from beginning to end. And then I sit down and I transcribe literally from beginning to end. And that is what happened. So then I was like, oh crap, I have this story now. I've got to figure out a way to like make it happen if it's even possible. And I spent about, let's see, that would have been in like October. And then I spent all of October trying to figure out a way to reach Dan Curtis Productions, to reach Jim Pearson. And I was coming up with nothing. And cue to me doing my deep dive research like I normally do when I start a project. So I read the majority of the Ross novels. I had all the Hermes collections, including the Sunday strips. So I was like going deep. I was like, I want to make sure I'm not contradicting anything. Is there a way to make all of this work seamlessly? I don't want to undo somebody's favorite thing, because in all of this amazing media that we have around the show, whether it's getting the story exactly right or it's a parallel time sort of situation, I didn't want to like undo somebody's favorite thing or their access point. So I had done all this research. The Hermes books were sitting there. Jeff did the introductions to those books. And I thought, okay, he's mentioning that he was specifically asked to write these. I'm going to do my teacher thing, and I'm going to reach out to him, teacher to teacher, and I'm going to just see if he knows how to get in touch with Jim. Um, I emailed him. Uh, a day went by, and I got an email that said, I forwarded your email. He said to call him at this number at this day at this time, and he's willing to hear what you have to say. So I was super nervous at that point. It's like, oh God, now you really have to get like your pitch deck together. You've got to be able to provide a sense of what this is going to be. And there are a couple of big stretch cells in what we're doing. Like, I figure if I'm gonna have my shot, I'm gonna hit for the fences, and I'm gonna try to do as much as we can. Because again, will there be a second one? The fan community will determine that. And so all of the things, such as bringing the story to the present, were things that Jim felt were the right direction to go. As we discussed privately, he did have two asks, one of which was we need to reroute it in the Gothic elements of the show, the early seasons. Like that's where our line is, which was already in my document. And then just being able to provide him a sense of who the characters are and why those characters are important to the story that we're trying to tell.
When you say return it to the Gothic roots of the show, as opposed to the movie that shall not be named, or was there something else he meant by that?
This is where we would add the caption of me winking at Danielle to assert that yes, that is what we're talking about. But again, like, I know the movie doesn't work for everyone, but I don't want to but it is somebody's access point.
It is. I've heard from several people who have kind of addressed that, brought that to my attention, that was their entry point into Dark Shadows. So, and as I said before, I am critical of the film. There are things I like about it, but I have serious issues with the film.
Yeah. And you have been so fair in your discussions of the film, but like, I always just think about it like this. Growing the audience in this day and age is really important, because if you don't bring in new fans of the property, then it doesn't live on. And so sometimes it gets done properly, and sometimes it may not land fully the way that we want or expect it to. I think streaming has been a huge benefit to growing the audience. I think the film has been. I think the Dynamite comic was, you have obviously discussed the Vampirella crossover before as well. And
I'm going to do a Dynamite Comics episode with Madeline Marks and Rich Hanley. It's already we're going to do it, but it's we haven't scheduled it yet.
And I think Stewart was doing something really cool. Like he was bringing those characters post the show. It was telling a new story. I don't know the logistics of what happened there. Stewart and I haven't talked about it. But obviously he left after the first 4 issues.
Just jumping in real quick here, I talked with Stuart Manning about the Dynamite comics a little bit when I was in Burbank, and he mentioned to me that he did not write the 4th issue, but they did use some of his story projections in that 4th issue, but he did not write it himself.
And they brought in a new team, but I feel like if Stewart had been given more time or had a more tenable working situation or whatever it was that was going on, I think that book would have been very different, and we would probably be having a very different, who knows, that book could have gone on forever. I may not have ever had the opportunity to write Curse of Dark Shadows.
Or you might have been doing it for Dynamite.
True.
So let's talk, I don't know how much we can say about this, but the book is coming from Hermes Press, but that wasn't initially the case, right? I mean, can we talk about what was going to happen there? Because when you went in with this pitch to Jim, you were affiliated with another well-known comics imprint.
Yeah. So at the time that I was pitching the story to Jim, I was also doing a short story for Boris Karloff Gold Key Mysteries #1. Gold Key is back as a publishing company. It's obviously a different crew, but they have a lot of really great ideas. They're doing some really strong work, both in Karloff and in upcoming titles that I know about, but I'm not gonna, that's their story to tell, not mine. And so my thought, my dream, my goal was to bring the book back and have that lovely Gold Key logo on the cover again. It felt like bringing it home. The logistics of the comics market and how that includes the book market is very complicated. And so there's a whole negotiation process that happens with the main comics distributor, Diamond Comics. And they're looking at a bunch of different factors to determine if you get approved for bookstore distribution as well as comic distribution. And because Gold Key was so new, and I'm a very niche small press publisher myself, because I do self-publish as well, they were not going to have book distribution in time for this book to come out. And we're still friendly. It was a very, like, everyone understood the assignment. Everyone knew exactly what we needed to accomplish to meet our contractual obligations to Jim and the property itself. And so they graciously said, like, please find a publisher that can give you bookstore distribution as well. And in fact, Diamond actually, my rep at Diamond, Steve, who is amazing. I've worked with Steve for many, many, many years. He encouraged me to reach out to Dan at Hermes, and Dan heard the pitch. He asked me, is Jim on board with this? And I said, yes, Jim is on board with this. And he was like, okay, it's done. We'll do it. And I think, another recent episode of yours, I think the coloring book changed how they are thinking about new product, because the coloring book was very successful. And I think had that coloring book not been what it was and hit at that exact right time, I think the conversation would have been a little bit different. I think he still would have heard me, and we may have had to have done a couple of things. But I think when they saw how well that did, I think doing new material suddenly became an option.
Yeah, which is exciting.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about. Like I said, I don't. We can't really spoil too much, but you mentioned that this is Dark Shadows in the present. It's Dark Shadows. It's what's happening now with Dark Shadows, and so I'd like to hear a little bit about how you came to the decision to do that as a sequel comic, and what are some of the things we can expect, I guess, in the comic in terms of characters, or maybe some tidbits about the plot, if that's possible.
I think I have two answers to the first question. One, I'm older now than when I first started watching the show. I have lost people who are close to me. I have aged parents who are requiring, medical assistance and care. And I just think I'm at a different place in my life where, am I looking back and being nostalgic, or am I in the current moment? And how do those things relate to each other? And how do I manage those traumas that we all have as kids becoming adults, right? The second thing that really kind of solidified my approach, and I just think this is a perfect example of what you can do when you let yourself come to the present, was Twin Peaks: The Return. And that is all about, what does it mean to reach a certain age? And what does it mean? Have you met your goals? Have you done the things that you wanted to do? Idealism versus, sinking into negativity or pessimism. Like, can you change the world? Is it enough? And those two things coming together, and obviously rewatching the show during the pandemic, I just thought there are so many, and again, I hate to keep referencing your past episodes, but this is something you all have talked about before, which is the family kind of fades into the background. They become sort of mentally manipulated by the monsters. They become victims. And I thought that horror has changed so much in that the female characters can be empowered. Like, we're living in a different time. The 60s has a very different gender politics than what we have today. And so what would that look like for some of those characters to really reclaim what's there? In rewatching the show, and this will be no spoiler, I'll say this till the cows come home, I am obsessed with Carolyn. Carolyn shows all of these. I mean, Victoria does as well. We see Maggie do it as well. I don't want to diminish the other characters, but Carolyn is like right there in the mix of she finds out Barnabas is a vampire. She's like, how can I get involved? Like, what's happening? But you also have that moment where he's attacking her and then mind wiping her. Julia helps. Like, it's this whole psychological trauma that they all experience. And I wanted to, you know, explore that. Like, when you become a certain age and you're thinking back on this time, like, what do you do with that? And has Carolyn been healthy in the time since the end of the show, like when they're going to the historical society, the book being donated, we don't see them again. And so where do we go from there? Yeah. And I felt like that was such rich territory. I felt like I had something to say about that and to bring to these characters who would be experiencing similar things.
When you mentioned Carolyn and David having that moment, this is them, they're adults in this situation then?
They're adults and they are living in Collinwood together.
That's really cool. How about Barnabas? What's Barnabas up to?
We catch up with Barnabas in Paris. Barnabas has been living a whole life away from Collinsport. He is a vampire, and it turns out that Carolyn has need of him. She has a promise that she needs to keep, and he's the only one that can help her keep that promise. And that's how he comes back home.
I could ask you, I could just go down the list of characters. I have Quentin, Angelique, Julia, like where is everybody? Will we see other Dark Shadows characters in the mix?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
I will tell you, many of the names you just mentioned live in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. Some of those plans have changed with recent events. I think especially with Miss Laura passing. I would not want to. I feel like my challenge is if it's safe to say Angelique is not in Curse of Dark Shadows. Oh. If we do that, I want to come up with something really cool that is a cool way to honor her, but is not insensitive or hurting people. So that's kind of where we are with some of the other folks that you named. What can I say? My approach with this first volume was not to overwhelm people. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that there's enough for fans who know deep lore, like you, like Stuart. But I also didn't want to create a situation where there were so many characters that a new reader might have trouble picking it up and understanding what's going on. So we really primarily focus on the trio of Carolyn, David, and Barnabas. And then Carolyn has become a professor of parapsychology.
Oh, okay. Yeah, interesting. And this was something that Sam Hall had kind of thought about doing. Yeah. I
had long conversations with Sam and Grayson's son, who was like just very helpful and very excited. And I wanted to honor some of that too. I know again, that has its your mileage may vary with regard to what's canon and what's not canon.
Well, I talk about this a lot on the show. I mean, it's ideas that may have found their way into the show, and some of them I think they were definitely would have done. I think that's probably one of the ideas that would have found its way into the show, that she developed a fascination with the paranormal after everything she had been through. It just makes absolute sense.
And she was the most knowledgeable of it too. Yeah. Like, she was the most self-aware of what had happened. Yeah. And so I felt like that was really true to the character. There will be a very explicit explanation as to why that's the route she went. Mm-hmm. There is a reason for it, and we will get that answer.
Okay. And how about David? I mean, because he had so much happen to him at Collinwood. He was, usually in the thick of it when it came to being targeted by the supernatural. Any feelings about that?
I also love the character of David. I think what I really appreciated watching the show in one, like, almost full sitting, was that there are moments of, like, they tried to make him the creepy kid, and
he was the bad seed. Yeah.
Yes, but then they pulled back from that. Yes. And there are those moments, like there's one moment in the show that I still get chill bumps thinking about it. It's at the boathouse when his mom is about to go full Phoenix, and Victoria is just screaming, "David, David, no, come to me, David, come to me." Yeah. And then that like very tender relationship that those two had, there is that element of his character which kind of got buried a little bit. So in my mind, I kept thinking, if you grow up with a parent like Roger, and that's the only one you have, and obviously Elizabeth is very often serving as surrogate mom, and I think that's a very strong relationship in the show. She obviously believes him. She wants to support him. She's constantly telling Roger, you can't hit your child. You can't send him to military school. You can't do all of this stuff. I wanted to like pull that out more, because it's like, if you hit a certain age, you're like, am I going to become like my parent, or am I going to force myself to do things differently and grow and be a different person? And for me, that's where David is. David's running the fishery, the cannery, because Elizabeth believed in him. There's an episode where they're talking about how she's acknowledging his boating skills, and I thought she would support him in this. She would encourage him, because she obviously has to retire, that she would encourage him to take this on, and so he takes it on to honor her.
Great. Are there new characters that you introduced as well?
There are. Carolyn will have 3 graduate students who are helping with a certain issue.
Okay. Interesting. So Carolyn's dealing with an issue. There are grad students helping her, and she wants Barnabas to come and help too. So okay, so I'm getting the gist here of what's happening. Are there going to be references to show plot lines and stuff?
They're very subtle. Jock has this amazing technique that he's doing where we are referencing past events, and they sort of appear as like old Polaroids.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And so you don't have to know every single like episode front to back. It's accessible, but for fans who know the deep lore, they're going to get that payoff. And for people who are just coming into it, they'll get a little bit of background as to, well, why is this character having this response to this person? Well, we have like a panel of the old aged Barnabas attacking Carolyn to remind everybody she's reacting to this. This is what she's remembering happened.
Oh, so this memory's coming back. Wow. Okay.
When the vampire goes to Paris,
Yeah.
and has been gone for many, many years, your memories start to come
Yeah,
back.
I love it. Really cool. So you said this is coming out summer 2025 from Hermes Press. So folks should keep an eye out on the Hermes Press website, and it is going to be available in stores and comic stores.
It will be all of the above, and it will. The plan is to debut the book at San Diego Comic-Con in 2025.
Wonderful! Wow, that's pretty big stuff. Debuting at Comic-Con, big time. Are you going to be on a panel there? Or
listen, I will show up and talk at whatever they want me to talk to. Like Jock and I will be there. We're going to come in and we'll be signing books and helping to promote. But I love to be on horror panels. I've actually moderated a couple myself.
Nice.
And what I would really love is to have like a Dark Shadows sort of celebration or specific panel discussion. So if people want to make that happen, hit me up. Yeah. I'm happy to do what I can to make that happen.
I know one year when Hermes was there, they did do a panel, and Lara Parker and Catherine Lee Scott were both on it. So, that's really cool. Is there anything else that you want to touch on that I did not ask you about?
Well, so I have a question for you. I'm curious. So you listed off a bunch of characters when we were talking about who may or may not allegedly be appearing in this book or potential future books.
Count Patofi. No.
This is the part where the captions would read, Craig winks in acknowledgement of Danielle's statement. No, I love Count Patofi. I'm wondering, in all of your talks, are there characters that are too polarizing? Like, I'm not saying this character will or won't appear, but I'll give an example. Like, is Adam a character that people would not want to see?
You're probably asking the wrong person, because I'm going to say that people would want to see Adam, because that storyline did not give us closure on that character. It was such an abrupt ending for a character who was such a prominent character in the show. And he is a character that some people really like Adam and some people really don't like Adam. And I find people tend to like the early Adam before he falls under the sway of Nicholas Blair, because Nicholas, of course, corrupts Adam, and then he starts acting really
He's a boyfriend.
yeah, to everyone around him and making demands, although there are echoes of Barnabas in his personality. Barnabas was the life force for Adam. So some of the things people don't like about Adam are things
things that have an origin in what we already saw.
Yeah. So that said, I mean, people are even Sam Hall in that article, he addressed Adam. I mean, Adam goes into Professor Stokes' room and then we never see him again. So I vote yes, thumbs up to Adam. And I think there are enough fans out there who would want to see some closure on Adam. Is he someone you had in mind to use?
No comment. I'll give you two. I'll give you two. I'll tell you two that I.
Okay.
Harry Johnson is going to be a regular. He's like a regular at the Blue Whale.
I love it, Harry. You brought wow. That's a deep cut. That's great.
He's just always going to be sitting at the bar. We may not mention him. He may not get called out by name, but you're going to see him there. And then there is one episode where they introduce an African American nurse. She has a confrontation with Nicholas Blair. She doesn't want to let him in the hospital room. She is coming back. She's the chief of staff. She has a name, and she has been friends with Carolyn all these years.
Awesome. I love it. That's so cool that you brought her back. I love that. Because, I mean, let's face it, Dark Shadows was kind of white, uptight, and out of sight. There was up in rural Maine, there was...
In fairness, like, I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, but, like, I just feel like the world looks different, especially with the way that transportation has enabled us to move around. We have a lot more, immigration happening. It's right on the water, so it's like an entry point into the country. Not necessarily Collinsport, but like it just feels like in this modern day that Collinsport would look a little bit different.
I'm looking forward to this, and I'm really psyched. And is there anything else you want to add?
You are going to provide a sneak peek of the cover.
Thank you.
You get that exclusive, so this is where the image appears. I guess if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see the image here. So if you're listening, go to YouTube and watch, like, and subscribe.
Thanks.
And then you'll be able to see the cover, which is by a good friend of mine. His name is Nathan Uten. It's a painted cover for fans of like Sandman and whatnot. You should catch some of those vibes from the cover. What else do I want to say? I'm so honored to be able to do this. I hope that people know and feel like it's in very good hands. I love it just as much as all of you, and I want to give you something that you too love. Obviously, I can't give you everything, but like I hope that people embrace it and really love it as much as we do.
Craig, I want to thank you for sitting down with me here at the Dark Shadows Remembrance Weekend. It's Thursday now. It's actually the 4th of July where we're sitting here in my hotel room doing this interview. The event has not started yet. I do hope to record a few tidbits, not Friday. Friday's a celebration of life for Lara, but Saturday I think I'm going to break out the microphone. But I'm honored that you reached out to me and were interested in doing the podcast, and I'm excited to see this comic, to read the comic, and you've definitely left some tantalizing hints here. So folks, keep an eye out. Hermes Press. I'll put a link in the show notes, but I mean, this is going to be all over Dark Shadows fandom when this hits. I mean, people are going to be definitely very excited for this. So thank you so much, Craig, for bringing Dark Shadows back to comics.
Thank you. Please, again, I'm happy to come back. We can talk when the book is out. We can get into some more nuts and bolts about what went in and what didn't go in. And I will leave this tease with you. I've been doing a lot of reading about native fishing rights in Maine.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's something they never got into in the show, and very interesting. Yeah. I mean, New England, it's definitely, and I was talking to a friend of mine recently. He's a big horror fan. He used to run Rick Ribello used to run the Rhode Island International Horror Film Festival. We're both New Englanders. And that's something he brought up because he's a Dark Shadows fan too. And he said they never touched on like Native American lore in the show, and that would have been interesting. And since it's in Maine, so cool to hear that.
I will tell you, it's not in book 1, but if we get to do another one,
nice, very cool. So we're already teasing book 2 here. So this is definitely something that I hope it turns into a series. But thank you again, Craig. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be Terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.